So let me get started. Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. We are going through the design way. And today we are going to be talking about Desiderata. I don't know how to pronounce it. I did not learn how to pronounce it. So Marisa is going to teach us. What we're going to do is I want to invite everybody who has read the chapter to talk about what they got from it. Okay, we're going to start with Marisa, and then anybody who wants to speak, go ahead and type exclamation mark, and we'll go through it. As always, Jing will have her presentation in the middle. We'll put it somewhere in the middle so that we'll get to we'll get other people to first speak a little bit and then speak after that. Jing does such a fantastic job of summarizing and jogging memories of everybody who has read the chapter and give some idea to people who have not read the chapter. And after everybody has had a chance to talk about what they got from the chapter, we'll go into the breakout rooms, discuss it amongst ourselves, and then come back with the best questions that we have. All right. So with that, let's get started. Maritza, the floor is yours.
Okay. Well, I did learn that I say the word incorrectly. It is a Latin word, and I say it with a horrifically Spanish accent. So you will hear me say desiderata, but I believe it's desideratum or desiderata. That would be the Latin way to say it, but I am going to butcher it and say it in Spanish. So now we know desiderata is the plural form of the word desideratum, and that is something that is needed or wanted, and it comes from Latin background. So with that, I'm gonna switch to the pivot just a tiny bit here. So this was actually the very first chapter that I read of this book. So in going through for this week, I kind of went through it again. I reread it and then went through and picked out some of the things that stood out the most for me. What I've decided to focus on here with you guys today is the concept of intention, motivation, and how this is, the Desiderata as an inclusive whole, and the phrase unity in diversity. So, and that's kind of happened us all around the chapter. But in my, I'm giving you guys the Cliff Notes version from Ritza's point of view. And what I see here is that what we're being told is that, so now we know that desiderata is desired things. And how do we look at desired things from a perspective of design? We're told that traditionally, as a society, we give massive amounts of importance to those things which are necessary and needed. And we treat those things that are desirable as afterthoughts. And so we've used the word intention before. So here it comes up again. And it's proposed that perhaps we switch our perspectives a little bit and consider desires with the importance of them being something we would like to learn about with intention. And, the chapter goes on to explain to us how we can get stuck in intentional change process or thinking because there's just so many parameters. So, and I'm sure that's going to come up for other folks. Another fun, really quick, little mini lesson for you guys here. Imperative. So everybody knows what the imperative voice is. Yes, that is if you say, fetch me a donut, that's imperative. So we're told that the desiderata form the imperative voice of design, which I think is great. It gives a command because an imperative mood will give a command. So I really like the thought that it should be the desired things that are giving the command to design. And that's really impactful when you look at it from the idea of what intention do we care about? We care about human intention. You know, it's so humanity, people, all of us, we desire to flourish. We want to be better than just surviving. A phrase near and dear to me that got me through many a hard day was the reminder that surviving is not living. And I didn't want to just survive, I wanted to live. And I didn't know what that side looked like. I just knew that I was on this side, on the side of surviving, and it was not good enough. And that's the same thing I'm hearing here in this chapter, that that's not good enough. And the way to get to better is by intentionally seeking it. And there's two things that we're told desires help us form and name our intention. And then further on, they make it even more pithy. And we're told desires will aim and name our intentions. And so it's all about the intention, but the desires are the weapon that we will use. And we're reminded here that desire is force. Desire is this energy that we have to wield and push towards a certain area. There is a, so in this chapter, my favorite figure is figure 5.3, and it's called Design, Aim, and Outcome. And the beauty of this figure is that it reminds us that intention is the process of aiming, and that intention gives direction to effort. And to me, that really makes a lot of sense, because don't we want the things that are identified as desires to be the ones directing effort? And we're talking, you know, like actual desires. And something else to remind folks of here is that it says it is the client's desire, desiderata. So it's, you know, it's the where you're looking, right? So here, oh, thanks, Shrikant. So this is design, aim, and outcome. We have appreciation, desiderata, with motivation and alignment in the middle. It's a conversion process. I will briefly remind you that when we speak of the parti, that's the seed. That is the seed of wisdom and your aha moment. So you can only get to that after you do a emergent. And this figure is beautiful because it also reminds you that no one path alone will get you there. You require all of them, and they need to be considered because they will converge and allow you to find the spark that will germinate your seed of wisdom and get you to that aha moment where now you're on the emergence process. So I really like this one here for the reminder to us that we're not trying to, so I'm sorry, just briefly lost my, so we're answering the question, how do we deal with the call for change? And this figure, I think that's a beautiful job of describing to you what one does. If we focus on intention, but the funny thing is you have to focus with intention. And through doing so, we will identify what are the desired things of your clients. And if we're talking personal, you might be the client. I just would like to put that out there just for another perspective to consider. So the client's desires will help to aim the designer's process. You know, the design process is going to be molded by the client's desiderata. And then when you find alignment between those two, there's the motivational push forward for that seed that we're trying to germinate, the seed of wisdom, which is the goal, right? That, and I really like it also because I'm always thinking that the path that we want to be on, that meaningful path, is movement. We want that forward moving path, and this figure just does a nice job. To me, I see movement even in the figure itself, and that's what calls to me. And I'm going to jump to the beginning of something that we're told here, is that there's a cautionary tale about desired things, in that it's the reminder for how important intentionality is. And I have been kind of really focusing on this word across several different platforms for the last several weeks, because it's becoming kind of a shining beacon of how so many things can go wrong if we just float. And here we're reminded that trend destiny violates intentional approach. So what it's telling us is that a created need is an imposed desire. So if you're not looking at an intentional desire, you may not find that path that gets you towards the seed that you want, because it's not intentional. It may not have the direction, because you need to aim in order to find the right path. So it's just not something that we can do if we're just floating. But the need for balance also is identified here, because there's also the fact that if you laser focus only on one thing, you're going to allow other things not to flourish. And so you have to find the perfect balance here between, and it's why several times throughout this chapter, we're reminded that one approach is not the correct approach. And that really just, it hits home, especially when you've read the chapter more than once. It just does a really good job of cementing for you the fact that, you want to align. And there's a statement here that I'm going to read to you guys just because I really like it. It's very, very short. And it says, the ability to create an alignment of these independently powerful and capable minds brings focus to and magnifies the potential within the design process. And he's talking about this, when he's talking about his design teams. And it's that, and that phrase, unity in diversity, is what comes up next after this is said. And it really does cause one to think about, okay, so if desiderata are desired things, why do I care about a team? Why do I need to worry about the group? And the reason is, it's here, it's in that very small little phrase, the unity in diversity. Because all of the things we were just describing are easier done when you have a diversity. And then he even talks about flow here. He says, participation in alignment has been characterized as the experience of flow that is an experiential state of cognition without the normal distinctions and distractions of measured time and space. And I don't want to get like overly into too much into the flow. That's a different meeting. But I think that in this chapter, it's very much the concept that we're being shown here and that we can take and make our own is if we move forward with intention. First of all, the fact that you're doing it with intention means you're that much closer naturally to identifying desired things as opposed to superfluous or, imposed desires. If you're moving forward with intention, you're already closer to that which is desired. And if you continue to do so, and do so from a perspective of from within, flowing through to without, you will effectively encourage your team to do so. And then as a group of individuals moving forward with intention, that group of individuals is going to have a diversity that is stronger and more disparate than if we did none of this. And I really hope that makes sense, because it does to me. And if it doesn't to you guys, I apologize profusely. And I'm going to stop there. Thanks, Shika.
Thanks, Maritza. That was great. Next up is going to be Mike, followed by Laurie, and then Joe. Mike.
Is that me, Shrikant?
Yes, Mike 1.
Mike 1, right. Yeah, thank you. I found the chapter interesting when they were talking about the sections of desires in terms of what ought to be, what is. And I start to think a little deeply about necessity. So it was a little confusing at one point, because what ought to be is pretty diverse and arbitrary, and you might have all of us in this group tonight not agree on what ought to be coming in the future of design. But I found it easier for me, the lower I got in terms of our base needs, the easier it got for me to digest this material. For example, the water that I drink, I live in an apartment, but it's structurally sound. The gasoline in my car, like the absolute basic necessities in my life, I find very easy to follow and understand their design. If we leap forward to what ought to be, or in terms of what all of us here collectively might say we should be 10 years from now, I start to get scattered. So it seems like the more abstract the design becomes for needs that are not those base needs, I find myself getting very confused because I don't know what ought to be. So I hope I'm making the point that I think what I got from this chapter in terms of desire is not to discount the importance of the very basic human needs that we have: water, shelter, food, etc.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Next up is going to be Laurie, followed by Joe. Laurie.
Okay. So I actually do design for a living, but might be, concrete, rebar, nothing super artistic or anything. However, and so I tried to think of it in those terms, and I really felt like this chapter described kind of the process we go through in my profession, which is bridge design and mostly repairing existing bridges in a very interesting way. So one thing too with the bridge design profession, we're governed by, we get most of our funding from the federal government, and so we're governed by this NEPA, National Environmental Protection Act. And that act really lays out processes to make sure that, we're getting any kinds of effective groups, community boards, schools, what is that, archaeology, anything like that, hazmats, that we're just considering all of that stuff. And so I was trying to think about, what are those needs or are those desires? And I'm leaning toward kind of, maybe those are desires, because the need is just to fix this bridge, but we need to just branch out and get everyone's perspective so that we can make sure that we're considering everything. One of my favorite lines in the book was to say that the vision is the outcome of creative design-based leadership rather than the starting point. I mean, that's just everything, because if you go in just thinking about, okay, my vision is I'm going to fix this girder, and then you just like go gangbusters doing that without really going through this process where you have a leader that's you know, even just talking to the various departments in my own company, like, do we have to worry about water going into the drains or something like that? You know, so this is a real leadership task that you're going through, and you're pulling all these parts together. I could say each group's desires and putting it together into a vision. And it's really important that that vision get communicated so that, you know, everyone can really understand. Like, I could sit there and do all of this, and if I don't make it in a form that I can communicate, you know, it's as if I didn't do it. That's one thing that's really important. I think that's really a big part of leadership, is to communicate the vision, but you don't, like, it's not the starting point. It's this process that results in the vision. So yeah, so I would say that was my big takeaway from the book. At the very beginning, when they talk about aesthetics, ethics, and reason, and how that those are all integrated in the Desiderata, I'm really excited to hear what other people say about that, because I'm still trying to wrap my head around, you know, what that really means.
Wonderful.
Anyway,
Thank you. Thank you, Laurie. Next up is going to be Joe. Joe, go ahead.
So yeah, this is a chapter that, you know, it was interesting to wrap my head around it. And, you know, I tried to think about it from a couple different practical angles, but ultimately I think I kept coming back to the diagram in 5.1 in order to really kind of understand the chapter itself. So, you know, keeping in mind that design, that Desiderata is with the idea of the client and the end users in mind and coming up with the ideal, and that we often start with a needs assessment, and that this needs assessment kind of unfortunately will limit our perspective on reality and what possibilities that we can actually achieve, as opposed to having a desirable outcome. We're just focusing on what is already, you know, what the client wants or needs, not necessarily what they want, what they need. So I looked at this from the sweep in approach, and I said to myself, the best analogy I could come in, and actually the way I understood it, was that this is like boiling the ocean, we used to say in consulting, is that you try to solve too many problems at once. And when you end up, you just start reverting back to things that you know in order to answer the problem, as opposed to actually having intention as to what the outcome you want to achieve. And that was, you know, kind of drilled home when I was in consulting quite a bit, is to make sure we had a scope and we really had a desired outcome in mind when we were actually coming up with a way to come up with a solution. Then there's the blocked out boilerplate approach that also happens when you're coming up with a design, and there's a one size fits all. So Laurie talked a little bit about how, you know, in the book mentions how a policy can be written, and it may not necessarily do what you intended it to do for everyone, because there isn't a one size fits all. And then you think about this in terms of the ultimate particular, there isn't a one size fits all approach when you're coming up with a particular ideal, you know, the ultimate particular. So this would compromise that part of it as well. And then there's the Desiderata assessment aspect of things that is the main point of the chapter, where you have a place where you're aiming at what your desired outcome is. And I've found that the three approaches to intention were really important in this chapter: the aesthetics, the ethics, and the reason, when you're coming up with desire. Because that all three of them together is an integrated whole, that you can actually rationally think about something and come up with a solution, that it's ethical, and that it actually serves, this is the idea of design as a service, that you're actually providing a service to somebody, to, in this particular instance, the client and the end user. And the aesthetics, the beauty of it. And the other thing that I really liked about when I was thinking about, I'm glad that the authors included it, was the idea of ethics and assessing needs, or, you know, versus creating a need. I thought that that was a critical part in the chapter as well, and an important part of design, because so many times now with technology that we often create things that people perceive what they need, and they have this way of actually, it's almost, I would almost even call it an evil design, where it's kind of an addiction, and it's actually creating a behavior that's actually not servicing everyone. And so I took all this and I tried to come up with an idea of what an example would be of this in the real world. And the one example that I kept thinking about was maybe Apple, the way they used to handle design, in the sense that they never held focus groups. So the idea was that if you have focus groups, that you're only getting the feedback of what the client needs. You're not necessarily getting what, you're not coming up with the ideal. So Steve Jobs always used to say that a consumer doesn't know what they want until they see it. So that's kind of where you're integrating both the imagination and the aesthetics, and both the, well, actually you're integrating all three, but you're integrating the client's needs, and you're balancing that with your imagination, and essentially coming up with something that both the consumer will want, but also that allows you to integrate your imagination into the project itself. So those are the main examples that I thought that was the best one. The only thing I will say is that doesn't necessarily, when they were designing, I wouldn't say they necessarily incorporated the ethical aspect of things always, but they did definitely incorporate the aesthetic and the reason and the rational thinking aspect of things when they were designing. And so I think that that's one interesting, example of design that wasn't solely focused on a needs assessment for the consumer, because that would have been very limiting into what they could have come up with. So anyway.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is going to be Laura. Laura, what did you get from the chapter?
Well, I can give my analogy. In an Italian butcher shop, they cut a piece of meat and there's all this fat around it, and they cut each piece of fat till they get to the absolute edge of the meat, and that's how I'm reading this chapter always. And so I cut through all the verbosity and I finally come down to the design part, and I find, yeah, it's great. That's what a design is about. And I wish you would give me a couple examples of how this design could apply in different settings, because I'm dying to see applications. I make them up in my head, but how good is that? It's not. So I find a lot of the work is like that, and I appreciate the work that they put into putting this together. Again, if this was my introductory design course in college, I probably would have long ago resigned, because my head would be bursting and I would run away crying, saying I could never be a designer. It's just too hard. But it isn't that hard. And and especially I think everybody has some of this in ourselves where we want to be designers. We all have a little bit of creativity. And I think it could be drawn out if they saw how, it can be made organic in us if we learn a little bit how to get it out of us. And this could do it, but I think it's got to go to the speak like you eat thing, and like the Italians say, keep it simple.
Laura, what we're going to do now is we're going to go to the presentation by Zheng, and let me know after the presentation if you get this a little bit better. Okay, Zheng, give me just a second. I need to make you a co-host. Hold on. Can you start speaking so you can come up at the top?
Okay.
Okay, give me just a second. Yeah, go right ahead.
Can you see the full screen now?
Yes, you need to still start the presentation. I see the,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
perfect.
Okay. Yeah, so this today we go to the chapter 5, Desiderata. It's a hard. So I have to apologize because there's the last page I didn't finish. So I guess you guys will finish it by yourself. I will try to do my best. The Halloween really ruined my schedule. So the first part is talking about there's 2 ways that initiate intentional changes. One is we move away from the situation we don't like. I give example like going to Mars. We don't like Earth. Earth is damaged, polluted. We want to go to Mars. And then the other one is move towards what we believe to be more desirable situation. For example, like the Earth, the desirable Earth is more, sustainable green. And the reason, a lot of time, the reason for change is because of we react to the external causes. We want to prepare. We only prevent against things if we have some past experience. That's why we always learn from our failure. If we did something wrong the first time, then the second time we may prepare to change even before it happens. The most challenging is need to change from situation is to be more desirable. So the need to change usually lead to paralysis. The complexity of the challenges, the change, usually we end up with too much information, we paralyze, we don't know what to do. So the attempt to comprehensively understand the problem usually is failed because we usually confronting with wicked problem. We have limited rationality to rationally resolve the problem is limited. So the foundation in problem solving versus, what that which is versus ought to be, then instead of not which is desired, Desiderata. So that's the difference between the reactive to the problem versus the design way of facing the problem. So the action lead to change based on which is, we believe is logical, the reality, natural law is already designed, so we just follow it. So it's understood through science and change by technology. So we assume the world is given, the design is complete. So we change, the change is just based on stabilized universal principle cause and effect. In that way, we have very limited power of design. So the change based on which ought to be a kind of truth is always reactive mode. So change based on what we want to be also is limiting because, for example, like the technology innovation, they always create this needs is kind of like short-term interest. It's not deeper sense of want. So usually we wear out very quickly with this value without a belief. So it's a bit, so they talk about what is Desiderata. It's a little bit, I think this want to be, ought to be, need to be is a little bit too long, too complicated to understand sometimes. So the whole thing is what we want is aesthetic. What is ought to be is our moral ethics. And what is need to be is our reason. And then all this put together, we create this intentional action. That's the Desiderata. So it's inclusive all this desire. Basically, it's our desire from our mind, our heart, our moral standard, all this put together. Then we form this imperative voice of design. That's called Desiderata. So when there's change in society, there's two different ways usually to make the change. One is sweep-in approach they mentioned. So we try to discover the right solution. We run into this paralysis analysis. So too much information, we get into too much details, then we get lost. Then there's another approach, which is block out approach, which is very simplified. We already have all the strategies, already pre-made solutions, and we don't really get in-depth examination. There's no detail, too general. Instead of intentional approach, we carefully consideration of Desiderata guided by the design judgment. So the design approach to change is we use Desiderata as assessment. We combine the needs and the desire. So we create and modify things. So we assessing needs versus creating needs. This is very important because I think currently we live in the society is very driven by the creating all the needs that we don't really need. So like the most updated iPhone we have to get and all the function we never use and they keep updating. It's like it seems we have more time to chasing after all the technology. For example, as architect, they update the code every few years, and they update AutoCAD every year. Then you have to update all the things. It's just you constantly in this chasing mode. And it's funny, like in our architecture group, we talk more about technical code, like instead of design. I was like, we become architect because we love design, but nobody talk about design. Like, so that's why I was proposing in the group. I said, we need a critique of design. Let's not talk about code all day long. Let's talk about design. And just like, so we start this critique this Friday, actually starting. I'm glad because like we become architect, not just doing code to get permit. We want to design, right? Why we don't talk what is good design? Anyway, so let's get back to this. So the design approach to change. So we have to combine the desire and the need together, and also not just driven by the advertisement. The creating need, the needs have to come from inside. It's organic. It's not like the outside external needs. And so the technology change lead to too much needs that's outside our natural desire. We were manipulated into this. We want these things, we want that things, and we're just chasing after technology. I think that's the reason the minimalism becomes so popular now, because we have to get back to the essence. What's really important to us to make us happy. And the survival versus thrive. So the need is key human motivation to change or innovate. So we think the state of affair and the desired state of affair, there's a gap. That's our problem. Then that's through the rational problematic approach, we can fulfill that need. But that's very survival mode talking about, because then we also have desire, which is more the thrive. So survival versus the survival. So the desire is triggered to transform the change. So they create new possibility and realization. So I was looking at this brain. So it's quite funny, like to realize the outside of the brain is all rational thinking. Then our emotional is actually inside. Then even deeper inside is our reptile brain, which is our needs, basically our basic needs. It's very deep. That's why they said newspaper is always reactive. Our so-called leadership in politics, they all try to attract to our primal brain, which is fear, because it's so powerful. It's deeper in our brain. We have no control over it. Our rational mind doesn't really, it's surpassed that. That's why they easily manipulate that part of our brain to use that fear and to create that needs. So anyway, I don't want to get into politics, but I feel they always manipulate that instead of use love, the emotion that really help us to be creative, be more visionary. So we always stuck in this reactive problem solving mode instead of proactive design approach. So the design should be proactive. And with Desiderata, we create intentional change. So the Desiderata is mind desire, heart desire, and body desire, and soul desire. That's what the combination of this, which is super duper hard. So I was listening to this Sadhguru talking about how we balance all the different needs. And it takes a lot of time. Each part of it takes a lot of time. For example, I'm trying to get into more exercise, so like I can't just use my brain. I have to be physical active, and I have to develop my soul, all this stuff. It all takes effort. So this intrinsic guidance and energy, all these things create this Desiderata will give us so much energy, and we become more human. And we connect to our deeper self of us. And they mentioned about there's a bad desire versus good desire, and how we can be more aware of our desire and accepting it, and then we can recognize form intention. So they give example of desire for love, and they use the real, the true, the ideal, comparing different form of love. So the intention is belief and desire. Is mentioned that I found this part is quite interesting about aim versus I think it's versus goal, for example, because I remember I hear somebody mentioned goal is for loser. I said it doesn't make any sense. We always set goals, we have the approach how to reach goal. That's how we self-development. Then we read some other book, they mentioned actually the higher way to self-development is not setting goal, is to have intention. So you want to become somebody. Instead, you want to be a marathon runner. So if you go just run a marathon, then after you finish your goal, you're done. But if you envision yourself be an athlete or something so you're not finishing that goal, you're done. You're just become. So the goal is just part of you become who you are instead of the end. I think that's what that book about goal is for loser. I think it's the same thing they mentioned. They mentioned about intention is the same thing. So you have this intention, then it's create an aim. I think it's important. The aim is help to accumulate all your energy in this direction. Then you, in the design way, you use your judgment in the design. Then through all this approach and leadership, you create this design and the design character and vision. So they mentioned the vision actually is the result of design. So the leadership, they mentioned a lot of time they think leadership should have vision. They already have something, then they just lead people. They mentioned actually the vision should be created with the people together, with this intention. I think that's also helped to explain what we read. Some of the book mention all this miracle happening in people's life. So like once they have the intention, then they actually pay attention to things. It's actually way bigger than what you think you can achieve. Usually all this resource will show up, all this miracle happen. I think that's what we studied on Monday before. I can't remember exactly the name of the book. I think it's mentioned exactly the same thing. So once you have intention, you don't limit it by your thinking, your past experience. Once your intention, then you open up to all the possibilities. Actually, you can experience much bigger, better result with this intention, aiming, focus, energy. So that's very different from the common approach. You set a goal, then you have action, very straightforward. This is much more holistic, I think. So the outcome is situation plus Desiderata prescribed intention. So you have this certain intention, then their situation show up to help with your intention. That's my understanding. So they mentioned intention is larger than goals. It's about direction to go, how to aim to be closer to our desired end. They mentioned the Zen approach. So the process of aiming. So you develop aiming, let go of everyday assumption, aim to reach goal. In this way, you actually can reach higher than you think you are. And the design intention, the Desiderata frame by judgment and vision, you create this partie. And with teams, energy, and focus, then you develop into this analog image. So the vision formed outcome of design based on creative leadership it's not the starting point, it's vision. So they create the vision with all this design process. So leadership, they think it's very important to have this design intention. So it's from initial expression of Desiderata and the judgment of real particular situation. So it's kind of like the combination we talk about ideal and the real. It's kind of a combination, then they create this design. So it's very important to have judgment to know what's important, who, and in what level complex to frame this design intention. I want to chime in a very more solid example for this. For example, I'm working on a project. Actually, we have two structural engineers on two different projects. One is very big picture guy. You know, when I talk to him, I thought, oh, this is perfect guy. So I gave him many projects. Then we ran into this problem. There's some problem in design. It's like, oh, the window didn't, his roof doesn't include my window. And he said, oh, don't have the window, it's too dark, you don't need the window. I said, what? The client wants the window. So it's like, you can't decide not to have window because you didn't design it. So it's like some people, and then there's another engineer, we're doing very simple addition in UW. And he's like, where's your actual porch? You know, we need to, I said, this is not a high-end house. They just want a permit. They will solve it in the field. So the level of detail, I think people get into is really based on your design judgment. You have to know what level of detail you need to get into in this house and in that house based on the skill, scope of the house, the budget of the house. I think this is really design judgment. I think the engineer don't have that judgment. One person is way too big pictures. The other person is too into details for a project that doesn't need to. So I think I found this very helpful with how you frame. You have design, you need a frame, you need a limitation. Within that, you make the judgment, you set up that, then you design through from that starting point, start your design process. Then they mentioned about this intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation. Actually, I read a book on Drive just for that, because I'm really interested in how to motivate my kids. So I was like, and they actually quite interesting about how, for example, Wikipedia, at the same time, Microsoft start Wikipedia, paid for all the employees, invest so much money. Then they started Wikipedia by all the volunteers. In the end, this is more successful. They end up on that project. So it's quite interesting. People actually willing, just like what we do here, Sherkan hosts this event, and he's very passionate about it. So the people, when they do, and I read this book mentioned about the difference between your job and your hobby is like, one, you pay for it, the other one, they pay for you. So that's the only difference. Whatever you do actually have no difference. The only difference is, so I think they said the new generation actually is less driven by the extrinsic motivation, because the extrinsic motivation usually fulfill our basic needs. The intrinsic motivation actually fulfill our internal desire, a higher level needs. So I think then because of the level of development in the country, the newer generation, they actually choose the company not based on the payment, they based on lifestyle. That's the reason they have hard time to find employees sometimes if they don't fulfill that needs. So I haven't finished the last chapter, but I found this drive is what I'm quite interested in. So I need to finish it afterwards. So I want to share with you. This is the intrinsic needs actually is way more important to inspire that if you want to be success, long-term success, because extrinsic needs will wear out and people's threshold getting higher and higher each day. So, and also it's short-term. It's only work for repetitive tasks, but not for creative tasks, especially. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jing. Wonderful as always. So now we're going to go to Becky, Charlie, Mark, and Allison, after which we're going to go to breakout rooms. And after the breakout rooms, you come back with the best question that you have. We're going to do a lightning round of questions. And at the end, if we have time, we are going to talk about our experience of this, going through this entire book. All right, so that's the plan. So it's going to be Becky next. Becky, go ahead.
I really enjoyed Jing's presentation, and what Lori had started that Jing continued on was so like exactly what was going through my head as well. Therefore, vision is the outcome of creative design-based leadership rather than the starting point. Simultaneously, this development process also reveals an understanding of purpose for this particular case and ultimately expands to include the general as your representation of an unfolding telos. In other words, purpose. Just as vision is an outcome of an intentional design approach, so too emerges an ultimate understanding of purpose. Neither vision nor telos begin as input, but emerge and are revealed as output. And it's exactly as Jang said, we have goals, we always have goals, but it's more of the definition of goal. What is the goal? And so here we're seeing when we make Desiderata our goal, our intention, it's not the external thing. Like back when I was teaching college students, you have all these engineers that are like, I'm an engineer. Why? I hate math. It's like, well, you're an engineer. My goal is to be an engineer. And so they go through this grueling process just to hit their degree. They get their degree, and then they go to culinary school and become something completely different. And so I think that when we do that, we just completely it's so backwards, the definition of goal. And starting with design, with desire, it allows that free form. And I myself have fallen victim to what a lot of millennials have fallen victim to: the job hunting, the seeking after the perfect place to work. And you go from one place and you're like, oh, well, this is this thing encapsulates what I believe is going to represent me. And you're disappointed because no matter what you do, it's never going to be the right fit for you. And so every 2 years you're jumping around. And in my case, maybe every 1 year, until I finally settled at a place that allowed me to have the ability to job craft. And that's when all of a sudden it's like, oh, well, it doesn't matter what the position is. You can call me anything. Actually, my title is completely nebulous. It's engagement lead. What does that even mean? Absolutely whatever I want it to mean. And so so when I got there, I was able to start grabbing the projects I wanted to. I designed and job crafted my position, and that's where I finally have fulfillment. And another thing is that when you make that external thing your goal, once you hit it, it's like, well, what comes after? Nothing. But you have to find something else. Otherwise, you're just left with this lack of purpose and meaning. But with design, your intentions morph with you. It evolves, and so once you hit your external goal, there's always something else, because your actual goal, which is your intention, has grown. So
Wonderful. Thank you, Becky. That was great. I really liked your description of the job and job hunting. Next up is Charlie, Mark, Allison, and Ambika. Charlie.
First, I want to say that my approach to doing things is to like a blind man and the elephant. I want to gather up as much as I can about what I'm interested in. And one of the questions I've been interested in all my life is, what does it mean to be a human being? And so this Desiderata is directly related to that, okay? And the whole idea of ethics and reason and so on. And so one of the things I wanted to mention was I'm going to post a URL here for an article in the Asia Pacific Journal back in 2013 that's about a book that was written by Brian Victoria about the behavior of the Zen Buddhist prior to the Second World War and during the Second World War. And basically, they had this thing of aim, and then just once you decide where you're aiming for, forget everything else, okay? And so they were very much in favor of supporting the emperor, and so it was a blindness, and there was a lack of reason, and Zen and Taoism share that in common, and they have this kind of like very negative attitude about reason and language in general. And so when you do that, when you just kind of do everything by intuition, you're going to be in trouble. Okay, I mean, it's just, that's reality. And so, but you can also, as it says in the book, you can overanalyze, and you can get lost in all kinds of technical details. And so the problem is knowing how far you need to go. Okay, how much, like if you're a musician and you're playing a musical instrument, there's a couple of things. Okay, number one, you have to get your chops. Okay, you have to be able to play the instrument. Okay, if you can't do that, then forget about it. You're not going to be a musician. And but you also have to have some sense. Well, you don't have to. I mean, you could just just do it for yourself. Art for its own sake or something like that. But I don't see art that way. I see art as a community event. So it's an interchange between people, and so. And this gets into the ethics question. So what did not happen in this chapter that I was kind of disappointed was to point out just how big this question is about what, because it's human beings that are making the decision, okay? And so if you don't have any sense of what it means to be a human being, I mean, there's things like psychoanalysis, and people have a subconscious motivations and stuff. So you get into the whole question about what motivates people. That's deep stuff, okay? And the other thing is this relationship between culture and biology, the nature-nurture question. If you start getting into the detail of that, that's also deep stuff, okay? And so I've been looking at this stuff, for 50 some plus years, and I'm still, my head is swimming, and I don't feel like I have a complete grasp, but I do know a lot more than most people do. And I do know that these are important things, okay? That if you're thinking in terms of a design of a social institution or social system, if you don't have a background in that kind of material, you're going to be, doing some crazy stuff, like the Zen Buddhists did back in Japan, where they just kind of, who needs reason? They'll just follow the emperor and whatever he commands us to do. We're going to lay down our lives with feeling great joy at death, okay, because we sacrificed our lives for the emperor. And it's just all kinds of crazy crap can come out of a ill-informed perspective on what it means to be a human being and how you can design a better social system than the present one. So even in something micro, okay, like a musician playing an instrument, what music does she play, and does she compose music, and how does so this is so you even then when you get into something that's supposedly simple like music, you still have this complex relationship between what is being designed and the context within which it is being designed, and so. and then you get into the whole question of health. If you get into a very large perspective, then you have the idea of sustainability and health, system health and individual health and social health. What is a sick society, for instance, and what is a healthy society? What is a healthy human being? And then you have the question of spiritual health. What does it mean to be spiritually healthy? And it's And I just wanted to say, that when you get into the doing your, by the way, that it's pronounced Desiderata. Okay, I've heard many people pronounce this, because people I have associated with use that word frequently. But in general, if you don't know how to pronounce a word, look it up on the internet. There's all kinds of websites that will tell you how to pronounce a word if you don't know how to
Thank you.
pronounce it.
Thank you, Charlie. Next up is going to be Mark, Allison, and Ambika. And then we are going to go to the breakout rooms. Mark, go ahead.
I guess I would characterize like what I got out of the chapter as it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. And I know that we talked about the Desiderata being, apologize for bastardizing the pronunciation. That's the best I've triangulated so far. I think that, well, first of all, I've never read the Zen of Intention, but it's all about aim and where you're aiming, initially, like what you're coming up with and what your starting point is. But when you add in the what you need to do to target what you're trying to do, the other influences and what your research, your journey is going to deliver you to a different point. So I think it's actually kind of almost ironic that we're talking about like arrows and targets, because it'd be a poor marksman that would do this type of job that would never really hit where he initially was pointing at. The truth is that's not what your goal here is. It's in what I've gathered from what we're talking about. It's more like a walk in the woods with a compass, maybe. I'm going to eventually wind up. I want to wind up on a different part of the woods to get somewhere, a destination. I have a compass that's going to put me in the right direction. But as the trail zigs and zags, I'm learning things. I'm looking at things. I'm seeing new experiences that are going to influence my end game of what that initial desire was. And it's going to change it. The journey is going to change it. And like any movie or show, the characters learn during the journey. And I think that this is the original desire they had, the goal they had at the beginning of the movie, whether it be, a trip across the country or, building something together. They tend to grow, learn, and come up with a new understanding, which influences what they wind up with. And again, just to call back to what I said initially, the journey is more important. That being said, for me, as a personal level, I'm a software developer, and I know that when we come in initially, we have an idea of what we want to do and what the client has described and our best understanding of what they have described to us. And a lot of times, we put up straw men, to show this is what we think we understand. And it may be very accurate in just presenting what they've said, but in seeing it and actually, looking at it on a screen, looking at it on a whiteboard, it's not what they wanted. Joe, you'd mentioned something about Apple, and I know it's funny because this is somewhat unrelated to what I just said, but one of the things is that they came up with products that nobody had a need for, but a few years later, everybody couldn't live without. And it's that kind of interesting thing. They didn't, when I put something on a whiteboard, the thing that they described that they thought they needed was half of it wasn't needed. And what we come up with is something they can't live without moving forward. And that's what I think creative design is. And that's why leadership is important, to be able to lead your clients in this case in the right direction so that they can help you in this journey to steer the ship right, and to be able to ask intelligent questions, to be able to prod them in ways that gets them thinking as well as you thinking, and come up with better understanding and a better solution together.
Excellent. Mark, I think that, Apple example that Joe and you talked about, it's a great example because it's not the question of what people tell you, but what their actual desires and actual needs are, which are mostly implicit. And a great designer identifies these deep implicit requirements or desires and gives shape to them, so that once you give shape to them, then they can see that they need it. But they were not conscious of it at that time. So it's kind of making the unconscious conscious through design and offering it to take it to a new level. Thank you, Mark. Next up is going to be Ambika, and then we are going to go to the breakout rooms. Ambika. Ambika, what did you get from the chapter? Go ahead.
Okay, so there's a lot happening in the chapter, and of course, everybody's spoken at great length about everything, including going beyond what the chapter says, because one word can trigger something else. But what I wanted to speak of is there is this idea of the design and the designer, the person who comes up with what needs to be created. Of course, it's in relation with who needs it done. And then we get into all these complications that arise and what needs to be changed. And then I'm looking at collaboration, cohering, correcting, and continuing. And that's where things can often get complicated. And I started thinking about the Taj Mahal. They didn't have committees and committees in those days. This is what somebody desired, what Shah Jahan wanted, and all the artisans got together, they built it. Now, of course, we have so many vested interests, which takes me back to the idea of what is the vision of the ideal, and how does a desire fulfill that aesthetic and the feelings that we wish to feel once something is created, which to me today gets caught up in politics and money and J-bonds and things like that. And a very small example, and I go back to where I was teaching, beautiful campus, very nicely designed until somebody wanted to spend millions on a building, which is so ugly right now. It's a monster, boom, just cost down, lots and lots of billions. It could have been done aesthetically to match the aesthetics and made it even more beautiful, but no, it's really an ugly monster. So where does all this get caught? Number one. And then a beautiful example, somebody brought up the idea of designing for the human emerging. And great example, a guy called Ankit. I've never met him. He's a great guy. He's one of my friends. Excuse me, he's about 32, 33 now. He left home and traveled through India on a bicycle for 3 years. And he's learned everything, all the history of the country in different states. And he's building by hand mud houses that are stronger than these houses we live in. And it's eco-friendly and natural. So if we need to look at what is emerging, we need to sort of simplify the committees and all these interests that everybody else has in going forward. So that's what was coming up for me. Is this?
Wonderful. Yeah. Thank you, Ambika. All right, folks. So we are now going to do breakout rooms. Breakout rooms will last for about 20 minutes. Please let everybody have their say. The breakout rooms are going to be facilitated by Joe, Becky, Maritza, and Mike. The rules in the breakout rooms remain the same. Keep on topic, be brief, speak your mind courteously. All right, starting the breakout rooms now. When you come back with the best question we have. We're going to do a breakout room. We're going to do a lightning round of answers to these questions. And the other thing I want to tell you, a good news. I started by doing Mondays, moving forward with the book chapter by chapter, and Thursdays as a way of doing a retrospective. I'm very glad to report that this, I think most people, many people are on a very good journey on the book. So we don't need Thursdays as separate anymore. So I'm going to incorporate that as the last half an hour. So if anybody wants to speak about their journey of the book, you're welcome to do that after the breakout rooms. All right, starting the breakout rooms now. And then we will go ahead and I'm going to collect all the questions. And then we will go ahead and do a lightning round answering all the questions. Let's start with Joe. Joe, go ahead.
So I'm looking for the exact quote, but it says, okay, the best design for a situation is elegantly simple and economical. How do you ensure that a solution is economical? Like, how do you, and what are the parameters, or what makes it economical, like the best solution?
Wonderful. How do you ensure that a solution is, how about both elegantly simple and economical?
Yeah, yes, exactly. Thank you. Thank you. That was much
Excellent.
better.
Excellent. Any more questions? Don't tell me that's the only question. Jeff, what's your question?
Well, I'm not necessarily expecting the author to give us
No.
example.
Yeah.
No, here's the question.
Okay.
But I am curious as to what might be useful metaphors for the design process, and even for Desiderata. What might be useful metaphors?
Excellent. What are useful metaphors for the design process? Excellent. Excellent question. Thank you, Jeff. Next up is Charlie. Charlie, what's your question?
Okay, in almost any area of human activity that has an artistic or creative aspect to it, you have the concept of craft and art. And in craft, you have the term is getting your chops, okay? And so the question is there a valid concept of getting your chops as a designer?
Excellent. How do you get your chops as a designer? Okay, next up is going to be Jing, Mark, and Kevin. Jing.
So I think the book mentioned about the, external triggered needs. I wonder if that art actually is external triggered desire in some way, like maybe it's embedded in our side, but people don't aware of it. But then through this art of something, they trigger that kind of like hidden.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. Excellent. Is art externally triggered desire? Excellent. Next up is going to be Mark, followed by Kevin. Mark.
So we talked about this a little bit in our breakout group, and some people had some interesting answers. But the question is, if the goal is a moving target, then how do you know when you're done?
Okay, very good. If goal is a moving target, how do you know? How do you know you're done? Wonderful. Excellently put. Next up is Kevin.
My question, how do you make a customer happy by designing?
Okay, how do you make customer happy by designing? Okay, these are actually very excellent questions. Ambika, what's your question?
How can a designer feel comfortable at what point when the design takes a form that does not cohere with any beauty or aesthetic, but it kind of touches on some need? What happens to the integrity of design?
Okay.
And then therefore, what is the shadow of the designer that needs to be reconciled or something?
Okay.
Come to
Thank
terms.
You. Thank you. All right. So you know what? These are all very good questions. And let's just go through them today in order. And let's see how far we can get. Try to keep the answers short, because I want to go through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, at least 6 questions. Okay. So let's start with, folks, in order to answer, just go ahead and type exclamation mark. I'll call upon you. Try to keep your answer less than 30 seconds. Okay. So first one, how do you ensure that your design is elegantly simple and economical? Go ahead and type exclamation mark if you'd like to answer. Okay, the question has stumped everybody. Wait a minute, no. Okay, now here come the answers. It's going to be Jing, Maritza, and Tom. Jing.
Well, I think you have to know the essence. Like we design always with limited budgets. So what people really care is spend money on that part. Then that's make it economical, not waste on other part.
Wonderful, beautifully put. Thank you, Maritza.
In this one, I just want to say it does say may be simple and elegant. It doesn't say must be simple and elegant. So I think the answer is iteration.
Wonderful.
Figure out what can be removed.
Excellent. Thank you. Next up is going to be Tom, followed by Charlie. Tom.
Good answer, Maritza. Iteration has a lot to do with it. First, a design doesn't have to be simple, but it does have to satisfy the objectives or criteria, even if it becomes complex. Things should be as simple as possible, but no simpler. Regarding the economics, you have to set up budgets for time, people, money, operating costs, and then the designer has to look at the impact of their designs on these costs. And more importantly, in large-scale complex systems, they have to look at their effect on the economics iteratively as they incrementally deliver the design. That's the best way to get control of multiple costs. End of.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Tom is one of the pioneers in agile technology he's like the grandfather version of the agile technology. Next up is Charlie.
Yeah, there is in mathematics an idea of an elegant proof. And basically another idea that's called a necessary and sufficient condition. So if you have a design that is like elegant, meaning like anything you take away will destroy it, and anything you add is not going to really make it that much better. Okay, so it's like you've reached a minimalist position, and it's beautiful. Okay?
Wonderful. Thank you. Beautifully put, very elegantly and simply and in short. Thank you. Next up is going to be the questions of metaphors. What metaphors do you use to think of the design process? What metaphors do you find useful? Go ahead and type exclamation point if you'd like to talk about metaphors for design. All right, I'm going to come back to this question a little bit later. The same question. Let's go to the next questions. How does a designer get his chops? Go ahead and type exclamation mark if you'd like to answer that one. Mark.
By failing, making mistakes. Unfortunately, but there's no better way.
Yes.
Hopefully you don't have too much responsibility at the time, but that's really it.
Wonderful. Next up is Tom.
I'm sorry, I accidentally put up my hand. But Mark, I think there is a better way than failing. I think there's some basic theory that people can learn. And then they have to, but then in addition, they're going to have to make mistakes to tune their understanding of that theory.
Thank you.
I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. Next up is Laurie, followed by Mike 1. Laurie.
So I think it gets down to having the beginner's mind and a beginner's mind even about your own mistakes so that you're very open.
Wonderful. Next up is Mike 1.
Yeah, when I hear chops, I think of that term from the world of music. And to me, it's not about theory, it's about execution. And so if for design, I don't know anything about design, but it would be the nuts and bolts that actually get something produced. So a musician would spend hours and hours and hours practicing scales or rudiments. So however you can transfer those ideas from music to design, I think that's what you'd have to do. A lot of hours, nuts and bolts.
Wonderful. Next question. If a goal is a moving target, how do you know that you're done? So how do you know that you're done? Jing.
Yeah, I'm not sure why goal is moving target. I think intention is not goal. That's the difference. Goal is a fixed target. That's why you get it done, but that's not who you are. So so that's why the create intention create this like who you will be like. Then it's never end. It's your personality. Then you can continue create new goals to finish it as a process.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Laura, Charlie, Ambika, and Tom. Laura.
I was going to say it never ends either way. If it's always moving, so it goes.
Thank you. Next up is Charlie.
Okay, I see there are two ways to deal with that. One is if you're looking at a dynamical system where there are invariants, in other words, that there are determinative aspects to the process that you're working with, and you can clue into that, okay, then your design should be flexible enough to be able to address that issue. If it's not, okay, then it seems that you're forced into a situation where you have to adopt an open system design so that the design can change itself, okay, and so that it's not a fixed design, but it's a dynamic, interactive design.
Thank you.
Kind of like the U.S. Constitution, where we're allowed to change the Constitution through votes.
Thank you. Next up is Ambika.
I think that the goal, even though there is a sense of it being fixed, it can be modified as you go along, get closer to it. Some things change, whether it's external, internal, and the design. And then when you actually get to and you think it's finished, you step back and you look at it. And if you need to add this little tiny of a curl, and that's it. And there's the aha. It's like, I don't mean the aha moment of breakthrough, but the that's it. And then you're going to keep reviewing and turning back and looking at it. Is the river flowing just right around this thing? So it's a whole sense of, because it's the inner design as well that is transformed in the designing of that which you were building.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Ambika. Next up is Tom, Becky, and Kevin. Tom.
Ambika said so well what I was going to say. Thank you, Ambika.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Next up is going to be Becky, followed by Kevin. Becky.
Can you repeat the question one more time?
The question is that if the goal is moving target, if there is continual improvement possible, how do you know that you're done?
Okay, so on page 166, we have this diagram. And so I like to go back to the hierarchy of change, where change is a difference. Change of difference is process. And this process right here is that iteration. And eventually you have to stop. And here it says you stop at, you terminate because of measurements of perfection, efficiency, or you do not terminate because of perfection, efficiency, or comprehensiveness. The design dialogue is cut off because of judgment of adequacy, essentiality, and significance. But that's within that process. And that's like with fixed, you're fixing your parameters. And going back to hierarchy of change, change of process is evolution. And when your fixed parameters no longer are the same, it's changed up enough, well, so calls for your design, and so it evolves, and so it's an answer both. You have to cut it off at a certain point, but you come back to it and you rework it when your external changes enough.
Wonderful, excellent, very well put. Next up is Kevin.
Yeah, consider the goal within the quality, time, and cost. So we need to set up scope and the detailed requirements. So when that match, we assume it's done. However, goal itself could be changed. I want better material. Maybe time is not matters. could be spend more money. So the task will be changed. Time will be changed too. So it's moving. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll take one last question, and then I'm going to invite anybody to share their experiences about encountering this book, what they're getting from it, what kind of difficulties that they're having. And I'm going to tell you about the chapters that are coming up. So the last question is Kevin's question. How do you make customer happy? Through design. How do you make a customer happy through design? We'll start with Jing. So it's going to be Jing, Mark, and Joe. Jing.
Yeah, we always give the more than what the client want. Client tell us what they want, so they end up give them more. We give them beauty, give them something they didn't even know they wanted, so they didn't expect it. Then they'll be happy.
Wonderful. Very well put. Thank you. Next up is going to be Mark, followed by Joe. Mark.
I was actually going to say, Jane, you kind of stole my thunder on that one. You had to listen is a big thing, but delivering not what they're necessarily saying they want, but what they need, and listen a lot of times to what they mean. They might not have the words to be able to describe what they really are saying. They might not have the vocabulary to be able to do it. It's your job to listen to what they mean.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next up is Joe, followed by Becky. Joe.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, I'm going in the same line here. I mean, you know, Jang really did capture the essence of what I was trying to say as well. It's just delivering what they need, but in addition to that, something that they didn't think about, something that surpassed their expectations. And I think that really kind of gets to the heart of the chapter itself. When you're incorporating what your desires are, you're not imposing what you think they need, but you're incorporating what they didn't anticipate or didn't think about and delivering what they needed as well.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is Becky.
Whenever I think of design, it's like what's driving that design. And creation is an extension of you. So when your client is coming to you and asking you to help create what they want, embedding something into that design that represents an extension of them, perhaps reflects their personality or reflects something additional to what they're requesting, would make them extremely happy.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Becky. So now we are close to 11 o'clock. So I'm going to give you a preview of what is coming up.
Oh, Shrikant, I thought we're coming back to the metaphor.
Metaphor. Okay, sure. Becky, what metaphors do you use for design? Or anybody else? Sorry, anybody else who wants?
I have one.
Okay, go ahead.
Create a future you want in the present that is better for yourself, your community, and the world.
Wonderful. Next up is going to be Laurie, followed by Maritza. Becky, thank you. Thank you for reminding me. Laurie, followed by Maritza.
Having a baby.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's actually excellent. Excellent. I think that's fundamental, and that actually speaks to all your senses and all your faculties, because that's who we are. The next up is Maritza.
I'm totally gonna cheat and steal the author's example of the symphony. If you look at a orchestra, I think that does a great job for metaphor.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Anybody else? Any more metaphors out there? Okay. All right. So now let's go. Ambika, very quick. Go ahead.
In Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately dome decree. If you remember that poem by Coleridge.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to be talking about the chapters coming up. So we've just finished our first spiral. So the spiral goes part 5, part 3, part 2, part 4. Okay. So we started with first tradition, then we went into composing and connecting. Then we looked at ultimate particular, and then we looked at Desiderata. Now, the second spiral, we're going to start with being a designer, judgment, service, and splendor of design. That's the next one. The one after that is going to be becoming a designer, imagination and communication, the whole and evil of design. And the last spiral, I've put 2 parts from part 3 there. It's way forward, interpretation and measurement, craft of materials, systemics, and guarantor of design. I might move way forward to be at the end because that would be a right place to end this one. So the last one is still up in the air, but everything else I think is pretty much well said. But I'm getting feedback, like especially I want to thank CJ. CJ keeps watching. He doesn't attend, but I think he spends more time watching the videos than it would require for him to actually attend. Okay, he watches the videos and gives detailed commentary to me on what we are doing right and what we could do better and what we are missing and what we have to get back to and how we can. He looks at every comment on structure and says, this structure is better. It's not, I don't always agree with him, but he always has great points. So I listen to him very, very closely. So I have flipped some of the lecture, some of the chapters based on his suggestions. All right. So now here is, so this is now from 11 to 11:30 is your chance to talk about your experience with the book. So you can step back and look at, this is basically Thursday. The entire meetup has been moved to this half an hour. So if you'd like to talk about your experience with the book, what is it that you are, just look at the book as a whole. What is your experience with the book so far? What are you getting? What are you excited about? What difficulties you're having? You're welcome to talk about that. Go ahead and type !! if you'd like to do that. Keep it about maybe 3 minutes, 4 minutes, something like that. And we'll go from there. Becky, go ahead.
I am so excited about this book. If you guys don't know, this is my first time learning anything about design. So this has so far.
Becky, I strongly object. Because your thinking itself, you're very carefully designing things all the time. You talked about designing your job. Okay, so you've been doing design, but this is a way of kind of conceptualizing it maybe a little bit more explicitly. But I think you're very much of a design person.
Well, it's my first formal.
Yes.
I never thought, so this is really powerful to me because being able to see this written out and work with it and label it to what I'm doing and understanding certain things, because when things are just happening in the background, a lot of it was to me unconscious. And so seeing it specifically written out, oh, here's the conscious part, here's the unconscious part, this is what's happening, the process. I'm able to work more with that and then reapply and optimize what I'm doing, which maybe I've been doing design, but in the dark, right? Mm-hmm. Not as efficient as it could be. So it's really exciting, and it's changing the way I think as well as how I can implement.
Wonderful. Thank you, Becky. And I'm glad. So that's why I sent you a message. As soon as I started, I discovered this book, I sent you a message saying that you need to be a part of it. I knew that you would like it. Great. Thank you. Next up is Charlie, Ambika, and Joe. Charlie, what are you getting from the book?
Yeah, well, as I've already mentioned more than once, I'm using the book as part of an actual design project, okay? And the Desiderata has made me to reconsider, okay? Originally, I wanted, because my original intention was to be able to facilitate the access to new sounds that nobody had ever made before. And I just kind of assumed that I would have to do that in the digital realm. And it's turning out to be really difficult technically. Okay, all the mathematics that's involved is highly non-trivial, and being able to get something accurate is really hard. So I backed up a little bit and I said, well, what is it that I'm really interested in? And then I realized, well, I'm interested in musical instruments that are joyful to listen to. Okay, that there's this kind of connection on a psychoacoustic level. But that there's something new, okay? So that it expands the scope of performers and composers. And so I thought, well, what about actually designing physical instruments using different material science and hybrid interfaces between actuator types things or something of that nature that would be part of the physical dynamic that a performer could actually get into. And so now I'm kind of looking at that too. I'm not giving up on the digital thing, but now I'm looking at direct analog acoustic design rather than simply digital, and it's opened up a vista that I had.
Wonderful.
Really
Charlie, are you familiar with the work of Helmholtz on this, on sound and music? Mostly about sound and how sound is processed. I recommend him. He's one of the pioneers who kind of figured this out for the first time. So you will
talk about way back then. You talk about 19th century,
yes.
Helmholtz?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
okay.
He's the first guy who thought about it. So he has very interesting observations about how kind of the mind process, but it's a fascinating topic about, musical instruments that sound really good, but are new. So it's really fascinating topic. Thank you. Next up is Ambika, followed by Joe. Ambika. Ambika, what are you getting from the book?
So, yeah, it's fascinating to me to read the process and the series of processes. What I would appreciate, at least in some chapters, I haven't read the whole book, is a specific example of what was started, what didn't work, what needed change, how they arrived at agreeing on some changes or specific changes, what they had to let go of, because that would make it real to, those of us who are not architects and do other design, but it would make it really, really lovely to see how that, and what was the final result. So those pictures would be wonderful.
You want the scaffolding. That's what you're saying. You're not happy with the building. You want all the scaffolding and the steps at which, okay.
No, I'm asking for a process that people actually felt, because they felt it before they, so that's because we are feeling and expressing our feelings and our interpretations. But what did the writers discover, and
wonderful. Thank you. Next up is going to be Joe.
The most important thing that I'm taking from this is there's two things. It's making me think about design in general. But more importantly, I really appreciate that every design is as a service, or it's about ethics to some degree. So it's not necessarily about just designing something that is economical and works. And I think that that's a really important thing to consider. What you're putting out there is actually good for everybody. And that is something I sincerely have not seen in any other design books at all. It's a higher level process. The one thing I would have really appreciated is a glossary, to be quite honest, so that some of the words that they would have clear definitions that they're in the book, but you just have to extract them. And that's, I guess, part of the work that you need to put in when doing this book. But I thought that would actually be helpful. The other part I thought that was really, I still find to be also very helpful, is the importance between digital and analog, and understanding how critical it is to know analog before any, and how that basically it's your purpose almost to a certain degree, why you're doing something in the first place. when you're thinking about things analog. And then you can add a digital aspect to it. I also like the fact that how they call out science and technology, and we talked about it in this chapter, are seen as the only two, like that a lot of companies just put money into science and technology and not necessarily into the aesthetics for a complete design. So I really think that they're actually introducing a lot of the arts much more than I've seen in any other book. So I really like that as well. So there's a lot that I'm taking away from the book itself. But yeah, a glossary would have been cool.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Maritza. Maritza, what are you getting from the book?
So I think the biggest thing I'm getting is that I still don't know what I'm getting. I feel like I have this certainty that this book is changing something inside me, and I don't yet quite know what it is. What I do find is I'm being forced to view things differently. And it's like I tend to be more of a logical, methodical thinker, but this book is just so inviting of me to think differently from that. And I've been striving to embrace that. And I also just love that I've seen in almost every chapter we've gone through together already, I can see the breadcrumbs or even explicit statements of telling us how this is the path towards building stronger communities. So that's kind of, and maybe I'm crazy and I'm seeing things where there's none, but that's kind of what I'm seeing.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, Maritza. Next up is Mark.
I guess, what I'm seeing is things that I do in life, as in my career, in just in hobbies, and like it's given me vocabulary to express and compare it to how other people have written, quite, very well on that process that is kind of an intrinsic process that you just think of in your mind. You don't really necessarily share it with somebody, but it's like for me, if I know that somebody is using software I wrote 10 years ago and it's still out there doing its job, and somebody runs into me, somewhere in public place, and I said, "Oh, we're still using that. We love it." It gives me a gratifying feeling, like I've built something, I created something, and it's that appreciation for creation. And this book is kind of giving vocabulary to that. It also would be, I've always had this belief that, if people could be taught to get an appreciation from what they do, not just do it because they're getting paid for it, this is kind of like a blueprint to maybe to show people that this is, if you think about problems this way, you can get joy from a greater goal, from what you do, what you produce, what you create. It's not just a paycheck you're taking home. It's a lot more than that. And you can what I like about this book is it abstracts it in a way that it can be applied to a lot of things, not just work necessarily, but like Maritza said, it could be applied to more like communities and things like that as well. It's not just what I see as a focus on employment, as opposed to a larger scale, and that's what it brings out. Now, that being said, I appreciate the abstraction at one level, but like others have said, I would really prefer some more concrete examples, because even the examples a lot of times are still pretty abstract. But I do like it, and I am enjoying it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Next up is going to be Joe.
So there's one thing I just wanted to really add too. One thing I'm taking from the book is actually coming and listening to some people with some concrete examples. So David actually in our breakout room had an example of his job of Desiderata. And so the other thing that I'm really taking away is people's experiences, and Becky's experience earlier today, even thinking about her job and how she was thinking about that. That's bringing it into context for me. So it's not only, it's the book, but the conversations that also subsequently happen that are very, very helpful.
Wonderful. Next up is Mike.
Yeah, I was thinking along the lines with Mark too, at initially wanting more concrete examples. I thought the material was a little abstract at the beginning, but then I realized that what I'm getting from the book requires work. I really have to work at this and read carefully and look up words in the dictionary. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Even having you allowing me to even facilitate the breakout rooms, trying to formulate questions for the people there. So it's just in a general sense, putting me on a path that I need to put some sweat into this. And I'm actually enjoying that.
Yeah, and as many people have noted, I think this format that we have of accessing the book actually takes care of the issues in many books, not just this book, but many books, because what happens is that the only way you can grasp a book is by yourself. So each person is bringing their own way of grasping the book and sharing it with all others. We are all bringing examples, for example, like Becky talked about her example, Charlie talked about her, Jing always talks about her examples. And you have talked about, your own examples of your dad and everything. So what it does is that all of that adds, and that's just at the level of examples. But this entire envelope of engaging in a dialogue about a book brings out, all the questions about the book. And, slowly as we go along, we're going to connect it to other books as well. And we are going to see kind of commonalities, differences, strengths, weaknesses, all across. So it'll be an enormously kind of wide endeavor. So I think this format is helping me, and I think everybody. Ambika.
Yeah, what Mike just said, and then you agreed. And I want to add to that, because that's what I was feeling when I was reading the book earlier today. There's a layer of these words, and there's a layer of those explanations. And then along comes this image of the hero's story. Who am I? Where am I going? Then I remember having to make a decision when I was creating something. It was a difficult decision, but I had to do it for the integrity of the story. Things like that. So it does connect in so many layers, everything else, that it can be an epic journey in and of itself. What does the epic hero do? He's going in quest of something, and these are all the challenges. And so it becomes a metaphor for all of that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ambika. All right. So folks, next time, it's going to be being a designer, followed by judgment. Now, judgment is a very complex topic and very, very fascinating one. I'm really looking forward to. So it's going to be being a designer. So next spiral is being a designer, judgment, service, and splendor of design. So that's what is coming up. And I, again, thank each and every one of you for being here. It's a great honor. And just the richness of conversation. So thank you very much. We'll see you soon. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, Shrikant. Great job. Thank you.
Bye. Take care.